back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host, Sean McKinda.
Chappie understand racism.
And that's right, it's a new year, and it's Neill Blom-ders.
No, don't make it a thing, because then people are going to ask us to watch fucking Elysium, and I refuse.
Listen, here's the thing, all right? If we're talking about Neill Blomkamp's filmography, we're officially 2/3 done. And, like, we can refuse to watch Elysium, but, like, if somehow someone, like, fucking held us down and was like, you are, like, gonna Clockwork Orange, eyes open, watch Elysium. Legitimately, that's the last movie that they can make us watch of Neill Blomkamp's. He's only done 3 movies. We'd be free after that. The conversation afterwards would be nothing because it's a nothing movie, but, you know, it would be done and over with. We're not watching Elysium. Don't take this as an excuse to be like, you guys should watch Elysium. We're not going to. I in particular are very done with Neill Blomkamp. I'm done.
Elysium is the least notable movie made by Neill Blomkamp, possibly the least notable movie of all time, swiftly forgotten by the sands of history. It doesn't even have the dishonor of being Neill Blomkamp's most embarrassing movie, because now we have Chappie to clown on, and Chappie is funny, and Elysium is nothing.
Yeah, Chappie at least offers some vestiges of fun, and the only thing I remember about Elysium is that there's a big ring in the sky, but that's just Halo, and I guess I could go experience Halo, because I think Halo did it first and presumably better in some capacity. I've not played a lot of Halo.
But we're not here to talk about Elysium. We're here to talk about Chappie Zero.
And Chappie Zero is a very apt name for it. It's District 9, Neill Blomkamp's 2010 breakout film that shook the world. It was so revolutionary. I bought it when I found it on clearance at Best Buy at some point on Blu-ray, and have owned it since about 2012 and never watched it until last night. That's how revolutionary it was. So what is District 9? If you are unfamiliar with it, basically it is a big apartheid metaphor broken down into aliens come from space. They're the hungry, huddled masses landing over Johannesburg, South Africa, and they are put into the slums and forced to live there for 20-some years. And this explores the racism inherent within that. I think that's the quick and dirty summary of District 9. I don't really know. And a dude slowly turns into one of the aliens, also known as prawns, which I do feel weird using as a term because it is, in context of the movie, a slur. And I'm just not a big fan of using slurs, you know? But
I actually was thinking about this. I'm like, do we call them prawns? Because on the one hand, it's like, you know, there aren't any prawns out there to actually get offended, but it does feel a little weird for sure.
Yeah, it feels like we're still doing a racism by calling them prawns, but I don't think the movie calls them anything else at any point.
It's just prawns or aliens, and that's it. Prawns is more memorable, so we'll stick with that.
Yes, and to be fair, I think that's part of the failings of the movie, but I'll get to that in a minute. Jackson, you saw this movie when it came out. What did you think of it then? What do you think of it now?
I loved District 9 when it came out. It was one of my favorite movies ever made when it came out, probably. Now, granted, I saw it when it was first in theaters. That means I was about 14 years old, for those of you keeping track at home. I had watched it more than once since then, but probably not since I had left high school. And in the wake of Chappie and Chappie, in the wake of Chappie, a common question has become, was District 9 ever any good, actually? Does District 9 hold up? And I honestly didn't have an answer to that question. And I think, to be fair, there's actually 3 different questions worth asking, and they have different answers. So I'm going to pose all 3 of them, and I'm going to answer them. And I feel like that'll be a pretty good cross-section of how I feel about District 9 these days. So question number 1. Was District 9 ever good? As in, was District 9 good when it came out in the context of 2009 or whenever it was? And to that, I could safely say yes. There's a reason that this movie was a big deal. Not a lot of other movies were doing this kind of like hard-boiled with an eye for social commentary sci-fi. I mean, its biggest competitor in that regard was Avatar, the Blue Man Group Avatar, which history looks even less kindly upon now.
You say that, but we are getting 23 and a half sequels to it, so they must be doing something right. And it's definitely not James Cameron vindictively getting back at that one person on Tumblr who said no one remembers a single thing about Avatar.
God, I honestly, like, I hope that they keep promising these Avatar sequels. He's been promising them since the day Avatar came out. And I hope that he keeps promising them until the end of time. I, in fact, hope that James Cameron is the first person who achieves immortality, like his brain is put in a jar, just so he can keep promising Avatar sequels that will never fucking happen.
Well, I have bad news for you in that Avatar 2 has already finished wrapping shooting, and Avatar 3 is like halfway done because they were shooting Avatar 3 at the same time as Avatar 2, which is always a good sign, right? Like, when you're shooting the sequel to a movie that hasn't come out at the same time you're shooting a sequel, that's only ever good news.
You know, Sean, I'm sure you got that from a reputable source, but considering the long sordid history, I don't believe you. I think tomorrow, like we're gonna like bite the dust, like go back in time to like the beginning of Avatar 2's production. But enough about Blue Man Group, the feature film, Blue Man Group HD, if you will. So was District 9 good back then? Yes, it was. It was worthy. It was fresh. It had a lot going on. It deserved all the attention at the time. Does it still hold up? I would say yes, to a point. I think that this movie, I mean, basically the core of this movie is there's a lot of stuff in it that still works really well, that hits the beats that it's trying to accomplish. I think that it's a very simple movie, unlike Chappie, and that simplicity plays to its strengths. I still had a lot of fun watching it. I was very rarely bored. Although I wasn't that bored with Chappie, so make of that what you will, I guess. But I do think that there is a lot that this movie does that it still deserves a lot of credit for. I think that the main character in particular is really, really memorable and works well and is kind of subversive. But as for the broad strokes story, even the broad strokes filmmaking, it's definitely sloppy, noticeably sloppy. It's not a perfect movie. It's not a masterpiece. It's not anything I would consider like one of the greatest movies of all time. But as a little sci-fi parable with, you know, a little simple action movie, yeah, I think it mostly accomplishes what it sets out to do. And in that regard, I still enjoyed it, and I still think it's worth watching.
Which leads us to your third question.
Question number 3. Was Neill Blomkamp actually always bad? And despite saying that I still enjoyed District 9, I think the answer to that question is yes. I think that this was a like lightning in a bottle kind of movie. I think it's telling that if it were that strong on its own merits, my feelings on it, I don't think would have diminished as pretty far as they did. Like going from thinking it's like the coolest shit ever, and granted that was partly because I was a teenager, but still.
And if there ever was a motto of beating a dead horse, it is we were really dumb as teenagers.
Yeah, but it's not like, you know, there were other movies that I haven't watched as a teenager that I don't still enjoy. Some of my favorite movies I saw first when I was a teenager. But this is not one of them. And Neill Blomkamp, every single problem that will become a problem in Chappie and Chappie That Must Not Be Named started here. It was there from the very beginning. The sloppy writing, the sort of confused structure, the pacing problems. I think it's got better pacing than Chappie, if only because it's got more forward momentum, but like it's got pacing problems in other ways. Like not every problem is as bad as it will be, but it's like comparing Sonic Adventure 2 to Sonic 06. Like, Sonic 06 is more obviously noticeably bad, but every single thing about Sonic 06, whether you like Sonic Adventure 2 or not, was there in that game. And that's pretty much how I feel about Neill Blomkamp and District 9. And I guess as far as like a broad stroke summary, that'll have to do it from me. Sean, so you were the neophyte here then. What did you think?
So the first question is, was it good in 2010? And to which I can answer, oh fucking hell, man, I bought this DVD in 2012, I didn't watch it for 8 years. So who fucking knows? I don't care about that question. That question doesn't matter to me because I did not experience it, and my experience is the only thing that matters.
Hell yeah, solipsism.
What does matter to me is District 9 good now? The answer is no. District 9 is a mess of a movie with mixed bad metaphors throughout it. It suffers from Snyder-isms in a lot of ways, in which there are a lot of things that are set up because it'll look great in this one shot without thinking about the lingering impact it will have on the rest of the movie and subsequent scenes and how the things will be changed and viewed through metaphors and whatnot. Like this cat food that initially started off as a symbol of taking advantage of immigrants slowly morphed into like this weird drug metaphor that slowly morphed into nothing. And so like it's this constant thing that in the micro, District 9 works. And I think that's the thing about District 9 is that it's not a good movie, but it's fairly competently done. And so like you watch it and you're like, oh, that scene was good, and then that scene was good, and then that scene was good, and that scene was good. But then you kind of take a step back and you go, well, hang on, but that scene, there's a thing that relates to that scene from earlier, and those two things now mean different things that are at odds with each other and presents, in some cases, interesting ideas that just are never fleshed out or answered by the movie, or in other cases, just generally conflicting metaphors that just completely lose all meaning in doing so. I also found the action sequences towards the end of the movie over the top and annoying in a way that I did not find charming. The direction, the action in general was just kind of shitty and overblown. So many blood squibs hit the camera, and unlike other movies where blood squibs hitting the camera are clever and creative, cough, cough, the movie we can't talk about. In this case, it was just annoying, and there was so much just shaky cam the entire time through. And like, I'm someone who is a proponent of handheld shaky cam in movies like Cloverfield, but in this, it was just jarring, and there's just the cameraman just shaking it to like, look at the action, look what's going on, and I'm like, stop. So I was really annoyed by that. I was really annoyed by how much of what Neill Blomkamp would become in Chappie showed through. Like, it's the exact same movie with a slightly different premise and themes through it, which was really, really frustrating because I'm like, I know that these ideas don't go anywhere because I know how Chappie goes and it's bad and it's just gonna end in the same way. And again, the biggest problem is that when you look at it in the whole, in the macro, the fucking movie falls apart as soon as you touch it. And I think that's what it boils down to, is it was competently made, but a bad movie. Which I guess takes us to the third question. Is Neill Blomkamp good? No, are you kidding me? After what I just said, you think I'm going to turn around and be like, nah, Neill Blomkamp was great. Fuck that, no.
Well, he did make this third movie called Elysium.
So I'm coming in a lot hotter than Jackson on this one, just because I think I have a lot of takes on it. And to be clear, part of this is the fact that I watched this with my girlfriend and partner Sam, whereas if I had watched this by myself, I would have come in a very lukewarm take. Like what you have heard is mostly my opinion. But then Sam came in and went, well, hang on, let's take a look at this from the macro level, which was something that I was not doing. And let's poke some holes in it. And you start to realize how much it deflates. So that really soured me on a lot of things that I would have otherwise been like, yeah, it was a fine, if not kind of movie overall. And we'll get into the macro stuff that falls apart and where Jackson might disagree. So yeah, I think that's kind of my summary of District 9. I didn't like it.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Broadly speaking, that in the macro, it doesn't work that well. I don't know if I'd call it a total mess, but it's definitely sloppy. I think that to the movie's credit, what mostly saves it, and I think why that sloppiness is less horrible than it is in Chappie, is that in Chappie the macro is very obviously the entire point of the movie. Like every single shot in Chappie is like, turn to the camera, say something stupid and obvious, and that definitely happens here more than once. But for every moment like that, there is something like in that initial like tour, like eviction tour of District 9, where there is a lot of stuff that works really, really well and resonates. And there's a lot of stuff that in the emotional goals of the movie, I think that you could call it a success. I think that it's an interesting philosophical question. Like the movie's main goals, I think part of the big disconnect is that I do enjoy the action. I enjoy it quite a bit. I love that it's over the top and excessively gory and all that shit.
Looks like something out of fucking Mars Attacks or the goddamn joke guns from Fallout. God damn.
I would say that I would like the action more if the build up to it were a little bit better, if it were like really, really explosive at the end, which it is, but like it goes, there's a bit more of like a boiling point and eventually it explodes into all that. I think they're kind of going for that, but it doesn't quite come across. It feels more like the movie is a more like it has like the documentary framing, and this is an example of the movie's sloppiness, is that it has the documentary framing at the beginning, and it's pretty consistent and it works really well as a framing device, and then halfway through the movie it drops it and we go into more like typical action movie, and that's definitely a big fault in the movie, like both structurally and stylistically.
That drove me up a fucking wall the entire time. Like I was constantly like, why are we switching back and forth between this documentary filmmaking and this like actual movie narrative style of filmmaking? And like you are at this moment, Neill Blomkamp, trying to have your cake and fuck it too, and I don't like that. Like I commit to a bit, especially because it's one thing where like if it was just an introductory thing with the documentary and then fades away, that'd be fine. But throughout the movie, he still tries to intersperse like, oh look, and now we're looking at it from a security cam, or here's some people watching it from like a different angle and recording it, and so it feels very much like just stick to your bit, man. And I think it would be a better movie if you did that. And instead, it fluctuates back and forth in a way that really frustrates me. And that's, again, emblematic of pretty much how I feel about the whole movie.
I don't disagree with any of that. I do think ultimately why I would say that ultimately I think the movie is still good is that as far as the story goes, although the metaphors and like the themes may be pretty shaky, like the character work and the and even some of the world building.
Well, okay, I do need to make sure that we're on the same page here, because you're referring to like 3 characters, because every other character is broad and cartoonishly evil, right?
Yes, but those 3 characters are really good.
I was so taken aback by how evil the first antagonist was before the first antagonist just fucking vanishes, and then the second antagonist somehow rivals goddamn Hugh Jackman in Chappie in levels of just wildly incompetent evil, and it's just
strong Hugh Jackman from Chappie energy. So very, very much the same archetype showing up again. No, what I mean, I guess if you want to like put a pin on it as close as you could, is that Chappie stars Chappie and District 9 stars Vicus, and Vicus is a really, really interesting and effective character. I think he's not an easy character to get behind, but that is by design, and I think that the movie mostly knows what it's doing with him for the most part. For like 80% of the movie. We'll get to that. But
well, see, I would like to say that this is one of the moments where I will concede to Jackson that I do agree. I think Vicus has some very good character work done in the beginning of the movie, and I think that it occasionally comes back through and shows up again, but I think that there is just large swaths of the movie where I just do not care what Vicus is doing or why he is doing it, and in general, it just feels like it's just Vicus doing Vicus things, and I don't think that is necessarily good character work. And indeed, in some cases, it feels like it's just kind of throwing it away. So I don't know. I have my own problems with Vicus on the whole, but I think that the idea behind him is solid enough that I'm not totally opposed to him, I think is what it boils down to.
I also think it's a really great performance, that actor, Charlton Copley. He's always the best part of Neill Blomkamp's movies, except for Chappie, where he's Chappie. So
he's also Chappie, though, is the problem.
That is the problem, and that's why Chappie was so bad. They should have used him in a real role. Because the only thing I remember about Elysium was that he's Hugh Jackman in that movie, and it's a lot of fun because it's him playing him. Yeah, I mean, like, and that, I don't know. Like, you know, a strong central character with a good performance behind him. I mean, that'll get me far. That'll get me to accept a lot of things about the movie. I mean, that was basically my reaction to Joker. So,
Yeah, I don't know. I think this might be why I also didn't like Joker, because I think that everything around Joker and indeed Vicus in I wanted to call it Disco Elysium. Man, we're talking about too many things right now. District 9 is just like bad. Like I will admit that I think that Joaquin Phoenix's performance in the Joker, and I did this in the episode as well, is pretty decent, but I think that Joker on the whole was a bad movie, and I basically have the same feeling about that in District 9. Also, it's worth mentioning, pre-spoilers, the Nigerian representation in this movie is abhorrent. So just be aware of that going into it if you decide to watch this movie now. And I am confident saying that as someone who does not, understand most of African culture. Indeed, any of it. I say most like I understand some. No, I'm an idiot. I am an Ohio fucking clown.
I'm a flyover cow. Moo.
Exactly. I am fucking nothing. But I did try and actually do some research from Black authors talking about the Nigerian representation within this movie. And the consensus tends to be mixed. The general argument I saw from Black authors as to why the Nigerian representation is in fact good is because basically saying that, hey, everyone in this movie looks bad, so why not, include the Nigerians looking bad in this movie? But the thing is that the Nigerians look bad because of stereotypes and ingrained racism in a movie made by a white dude. And I think that's important to remember, not to, invalidate the reading of the person who wrote this. It's a Guardian article, I believe. I'll link to it in the description of the episode. I'll throw the other article I read in as well, where they're talking a little bit more about why it's harmful as a stereotype. So yeah, that's just where I'm coming from. I just want to get out in front of that and be like, hey, this is a thing, and I actually did some research in it, so I'm not just talking out my ass because this is a dangerous subject to talk out my ass about because I don't want to be wrong. So
yeah, and for what it's worth, I didn't do as much reading because I saw the movie, it came out. There's been discourse about the Nigerian characters in this movie for years. It's been from the very beginning. Even people who really liked the movie were so that movie was great, except this is really fucked, huh? Isn't it? And I think it's even more noticeable and even more tone deaf because the movie, like, emotionally, like, especially in those first in that first like 30 minutes, does such a good job, like, illustrating like the damaging effects of like institutional racism and state violence, for a movie that's purportedly like anti-racist, anti-bigotry, to include this stuff, and to include it so brazenly is it's hard to fucking ignore. That's for sure. There's a reason that there's been discourse on it from the very beginning. So yeah.
So do we want to kind of? Oh fuck, we don't know what we're talking about next week, do we?
We did it again, except now we don't even have any halfway idea to go back on.
Fun fact, I guess I'm just going to keep this in the podcast because I want to tell the story real quick. When we sat down to watch this movie, I bought a Blu-ray recently because I'm like, I kind of want to rewatch this movie. And Sam's like, you should watch this movie instead of District 9 and just come in and pretend like you watched District 9 and just talk about this movie instead. I said no, because I didn't think I could fake my way through Cats that long.
Wait, I've never seen Cats. Do we want to go full meme? Do we want to do fucking Cats?
We can if you want. I'm worried that we're gonna run into an issue of not knowing what to talk about, but honest to God, that's a lie. No, you haven't seen Cats. You're gonna have a lot to talk about. Do you know anything about Cats, like outside the broad strokes?
I've watched to be fair, I've watched the Lindsay Ellis video, so that's a pretty deep dive.
It's not that deep though.
Well, say no more, friend.
I think we're watching Cats next week. All right. Next week, we're talking about Cats because we're just absolutely failing to schedule anything, and it is resulting in the worst possible outcomes for everyone involved.
Chaos is a ladder.
If you enjoy the podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes. Tell your friends about us. Follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast. Let's talk some spoilers about District 9, shall we, Jackson?
Let's talk about aliens and racism and allegory and all that other fun stuff.
So again, we're going to be diving into racism here. We're two white dudes. Keep everything in mind with a grain of salt, but we should talk about it because it gets weird. And can I open up with the broad strokes of the movie, the apartheid metaphor, and we can break it down from there? I feel like that's a good way of funneling things right now.
Sure.
So the movie is incredibly clearly an apartheid metaphor, as I have said multiple times now. It is, sequestering immigrants into camps and basically racism and profiteering off of these immigrants and just treating them horribly and subhumanly. And yeah, I mean, as an opening scene, that works fairly well. The problem I find with it mostly is that in this apartheid metaphor, legitimately the only person in the movie is a white dude and the two white dudes coming after him. And it feels like this is a movie that could be handled a little bit better with some black characters, some black hands on the writing script, some people in the director's chair who might be able to better understand the situation. And that's not to say, I think Vicus is incredibly important to have as the main character. I think the fact that Vicus is white is incredibly fundamental to the film and would not change it. It is very much an exploration of white privilege and understanding what's going on from a white person's perspective. I'm entirely on board with that.
Well, more than just white privilege. Like that's what I think makes Vicus work so well in comparison to Captain whatever the fuck his name is from I almost said Rambo, not Rambo, Avatar. Why was I thinking Rambo? Because of the military, I guess. But because I think that explicitly, that's a pretty common narrative. Like when you get down to it, this is the same story as Avatar, more or less, in that you have a character who is a member. Not just a member of the dominant class, the dominant oppressive race in the society, becoming literally a member of the oppressed class, the oppressed race, and learning to fight for them. The difference is with Vicus, Not Avatar, fuck Avatar with Vicus and District 9, it really commits. It pulls no punches on this guy isn't just like, your average like benefactor of white privilege who is like, oh, it's a decent schlub and he like learns a lesson. No, Vicus is a cog in a horrible machine, and like he is kind of a clueless like dipshit. But like everything that he does is it's more than it strikes a really fine line in that like it's more than just like casual like ignorant racism on his part. Like he does some pretty like mean malicious stuff, and a lot of it only just doesn't look so bad in comparison to some of the more cartoony characters around him, who some of which I think serve an effective point for that purpose. But like he has this job to go and like evict everybody, and a lot of the language there, like a lot of the tactics, a lot of the dirty underhanded tactics they use, like feel really potent and resonant. That like, oh hey, like, do you own this house? No, and the prawn is like, no. And he's like, whatever, I don't care, just fucking sign it so I can like move on with my job. Like he's an enormous piece of shit, and yet otherwise, in terms of demeanor, in terms of like his situation in life, it does have that same sort of like Avatar man, like just your average boy, ho ho. But like the film is actually reckoning with what being an average boy in a system like this actually means, which a lot of movies like this don't. And I think the movie deserves a lot of credit for that.
I think that those are fairly decent points that you raised there. Absolutely. But I do think that, number one, when every other black character in this movie about the oppression of black individuals in South Africa during apartheid is a racist stereotype of Nigerians, a thug cop, or a just dude hanging out that ends up in prison by the end of the film because he like committed blue collar crime to leak documents about Vicus to the public and whatnot, is kind of bad optics just in general.
Don't disagree with that.
So that's where my point comes in there. My other problem with this is that, and this is where we're going to have a conversation about this, and I'm prepared for it. I've taken notes because I know where this is going.
Here we go. Hell yeah.
Vicus still comes across as a white savior in the end.
I couldn't disagree more.
All right, defend yourself.
Literally every single action that Vicus takes until the very end makes every single problem worse. What we see at the end is Vicus doing the absolute bare minimum. Now, granted, I do think that like maybe that like white savior trope is a little bit inherent to this idea that like we're gonna have like Vicus kind of like atoning for his actions, but I think that's how the film plays a lot more to me. Like Vicus just keeps getting kicked to the curb. He keeps fucking everything up. Literally everything is his fault. And I think that the ending, I think that the movie like properly emotionally in terms of the narrative, like has us rightfully see like Christopher Johnson as like, the decent heroic character. And Vicus is at best like trying to make up a little bit for all of the horrible shit that would have gone wrong. Because if it weren't for Vicus, like Christopher Johnson and his friend would have just flown off and like, succeeded in the first place. Every problem.
So hang on. So if they would have flown off and done it on their own, but then Vicus needs to come on and do it for them after he fucked everything up, doesn't that still make him a white savior in that regard? Like they were already set to do it by themselves. And yes, Vicus fucked it up in the first place, but he still came back through. And the only reason they escape at that point is because he managed to do it. Especially, and the big thing that really gives me pause is his fucking like shit eating, like, oh, I did it. I saved this entire race and they're going to come back and they're going to save everyone. And that was me. That was what I did. Where we get that long shot of him like tearfully smiling as he's, clownishly evil man is getting torn to pieces in the background.
Does he really say something like that? I don't remember this line.
He doesn't say anything. No, he doesn't say anything. But like he's got the visual of him crying, smiling at like while watching the ship fly away feels very much in that line of like, this is what I caused, this is me type of thing going on.
I mean, couldn't you just as easily argue, since it is just a look, that it's like him like finally like taking some accountability for like his role in all this and feeling like he could maybe live with himself a little bit more? I don't know. I think that's like, I can see where you're coming from with like the white savior aspect, but I don't think the movie, if Wickes feels that way, I don't think the movie is asking us to feel that way about him.
That's fair, but I mean, I don't know. I think that this is genuinely just a difference in interpretation based on the ending. And I think my problem, like, I would be more inclined to give it to you and say, like, yeah, maybe if it weren't for just kind of like the other inherent subtle racisms throughout the movie that kind of still pull it back to being like, hey, the white person did it anyway. Like, if it was more equitable about like representation throughout the movie and not the whole Nigerian element to it. And like, I know I keep coming back to that, but I think that is emblematic of a bigger problem within the movie. And I'm not willing to give it to Neill Blomkamp that it was not intentional in that regard.
I mean, I agree that, like, you know, having the Nigerian characters and having that like absolute caricature, I agree that it undercuts the, you know, any like anti-racist leanings the movie has. Certainly, I don't disagree with that. I don't know, like, since that's not really related to the trope of like white man saves the day. I don't know if that.
I completely understand what you're saying here. Like, let me try and explain this better then, because that's not what I'm getting at. Like, what I am saying here is that what we are looking at is the Kuleshov effect, right? You've got two separate scenes interspersed together. You have him laying on the ground looking up at the UFO about to take off with this smiling, crying face going on. Your interpretation of that is him learning to take responsibility for his actions. My interpretation of this is very much I did this. This is what I accomplished here. And like, this is just very much a difference in interpretations based on what we have been placed in front of us. And while I would generally agree and give you credence to the point that yes, perhaps your interpretation is correct and maybe I was reading it wrong, I am not willing to do that because of the inherent racism throughout the rest of the movie, in that I do not feel like it is in me to give Neill Blomkamp the benefit of the doubt that he would not be relying on a white savior trope at the end of this movie. That is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I guess I just feel like that with the whole movie, because you can say that, I guess. I think the earlier point maybe you made is the more important one here. Maybe the hair that we're splitting is that like, sure, like, maybe he saves the day. I don't even know if you could say that he saves the day. Like, he would have gotten killed like 1,000 times over if it weren't for Christopher Johnson and his son carrying him at every opportunity. He would have gotten, like, you know, blown the fuck up in those bombs. Like, even in the stuff that like he instigates, like, he still like completely fucks up and has to get bailed out. Like at the very end, like, even if you can say that, I don't know, like, is it really a white savior trope if it's like a problem if he's basically the antagonist to Christopher Johnson, like, because he causes all the problems?
I've spent a lot of time thinking about that as well, actually. Like, that is indeed in my notes as well. Like, as I was writing this, I put a little asterisk. I'm like, is it still a white savior trope if he causes the problems? Like, is that still an element to it? And the reason I'm coming down on yes is because even though he still caused, like, it goes back to the fact that like they would have handled this no problem without him, and like the fact that it still boiled down to him having to do the right thing to get it all to go off without a hitch after he fucked it up, I would argue is still emblematic of the trope. But I don't know that we're going to come to an agreement on this, really.
No, probably not, because like I guess what I would say in response is maybe, but then at that point, you basically can't have a white protagonist in the movie, right? Like, if it's that baked in, and at that point we'd have to be sacrificing the like genuinely, I think, clever stuff that the movie is doing with like audience like assumptions of identification and like working cog in a brutal machine, and like, you know, the nice, like, you know, white collar face we put on that, you know, white collar in both business class sense and like race sense, I suppose. And I don't think because that's the stuff that works best in the movie. I don't know if that would be a worthy trade-off, especially because the movie does go out of its way to like really stick to its guns on like Vicus is bad and a problem, not just part of the problem. He like is the problem personified.
And so, yes, I think the answer that I would be looking for, and this is like genuinely some fucking bold and brash storytelling I'm getting at here, because I know it flies in the face of a lot of storytelling conventions, but I think would get the point across in a very, I guess, artsy, but also like I see the inherent flaws with what I'm about to say. So let me just preface it with that. Like, I understand that what I'm about to say is sacrilege to narrative storytelling. So what my theory here then is that basically the two stories happen in parallel to one another. Like there's intersections of them like coming together and drifting apart, but like Vicus, I would say, does not have any impact on the prawns. I hate that I'm still saying prawns, on the prawns' plight throughout the movie, and basically they in turn save themselves, and like they're clearly in the process of it anyway. And Vicus, meanwhile, still can get fucked up by that jar, but like just he drops it or whatever and slowly, you know, becomes a prawn and learns the errors of his ways, and I don't know, dies in a gutter somewhere or something, or just integrates into the society, realizing what he did was wrong or whatever. But like you can get both sides of that story still. The not redemption, but the saving of the self in the alien storyline, as well as the understanding that, oh my god, the system is corrupt, everything is fucked, I'm fucked, it's all fucked, ending of Vicus in this sort of parallel story structure that I am proposing.
So let me get this straight, because I don't want to be critiquing like something that I'm misunderstanding. So you're saying that like is Vicus still responsible for the plot like going off the rails?
I don't know at that point.
Because I think it has to be for this movie to work at all.
Okay. In what way? Like I'm this is not me saying you're wrong. This is me genuinely basically fleshing out this script doctoring that we're working on right now. So like,
sure.
In what way do you mean?
So what I mean is that like if you have I think one of the reasons that having Vicus as like our implicit like whitey POV character, like having him be such a fuck up and such a direct impediment to what Christopher Johnson is trying to do. For one, like, you know, the audience kind of already implicitly sympathizes with Christopher Johnson, or explicitly, or, you know, however you want to look at that. And the fact that
it's worth mentioning, for what it's worth, just for the edification of anyone listening to this who doesn't know, Christopher Johnson is the prawn that we're referring to in the movie. It is not
the main alien. Main alien.
Yeah, exactly. I realized that like in context of the movie, calling him Christopher Johnson makes a lot of sense. You know, it's representative of like the whitening, I guess, of, you know, names and whatnot and blah 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 blah. But like, if you have not seen the movie, that sounds incredibly confusing. So just clarifying.
Yeah. And well, because I guess like if you don't have Vicus impacting the direct plot, and like, you know, the Christopher Johnson story is like going on without him, and there isn't that, you know, recurring antagonism, like, is that point about the culpability and responsibility that Vicus has, like that's kind of the whole point of the story, is like the culpability and responsibility of like your average, just, you know, average white person in the system. Like, does that even resonate if like he doesn't really impact the plot and just does a bunch of like mean shit, basically?
Let me pitch it to you this way then. I mean, you could basically reframe this in the way that the movie is like the opening framing devices of the movie. Like the movie is really impactful when it is structured as a documentary. So like, if you want to have the parallel documentary and not documentary, you could theoretically have Vicus's whole stuff set up like a documentary, like Vicus's whole story arc through the whole thing as a documentary, interacting with Christopher Johnson's whole thing going on, where that is not structured like a documentary. And basically, Vicus is antagonizing him through just filming this documentary, looking down on this group of people, aliens, and being shitty in the context of doing his job. Like, basically, he still works for the company, but like is trying to puff himself up much as he does in the film for the documentary. That's kind of where my head's at, I guess.
So like in this, again, because what I think works so well about the movie as it is now is that, like, you know, it's Vicus's actions on how, like, he fucks everything up are very explicit, like very direct. There's not a single thing that goes wrong for Christopher Johnson that Vicus doesn't cause. Like, Vicus is the institutional barrier, and that's the character we're supposed to be implicitly, as like an audience, sort of like following and sympathizing with, as the protagonist. And I think that's a powerful tool, and I'd be loath to throw that away because, like, there's a bit of the white savior trope baked into that. Maybe. Again, I don't even know if I agree necessarily, but I'd be loath to throw the stuff about this movie that works really, really well, because there is a lot of stuff that doesn't. And so I'd be loath to throw that away, just because, like, the ending maybe gestures at that, when the rest of the movie, when, like, you could just as easily not have the racist Nigerian caricature, and I don't think as many people would take issue with that.
I mean, honest to God, that might solve the problem, to be fair. Again, I think that is really what it boils down to, is I think that you theoretically could convince me otherwise if it weren't for the fact that I just don't trust Neill Blomkamp to do that right, you know? Like, that's really what this boils down to, and this whole detour was me trying to process through that, I suppose, in a lot of ways. But yeah, no, I just don't trust Neill Blomkamp to not do that. So,
and I think that's fair. Like, the racist characters of the Nigerians, it really can't be understated what a major blunder that is. Like, you know, even just in the nuts and bolts mechanics of, like, getting you of, like, character sympathies, and like it's a mess on every single level. And yeah, I mean, they just as easily could have had, like, a different sort of antagonist character, or, like, not tied it into race, like, just had, like, alien cultists that's, like, you know, like, multinational, or, like, a separate faction. Although, again, like, not to
hang on. A Blom-der.
A Blom-der. He Blom-dered again, guys. You know, his entire career since this movie has been one Blom-der after another.
That felt very important to interrupt. You're making a very nice, coherent, cogent point that I did feel I needed to interrupt it to say Blom-der.
Look, Blom-der is in my lexicon now, and I love it. So it absolutely was worth it. But the Nigerian stereotypes are definitely a Blom-der. So yeah, I mean, like, you could easily avoid the ickiness of that by, you know, not tying that into race. Although I will say that, like, one idea in the hands of perhaps someone who's got a bit more of a deft touch than Neill Blomkamp, shall we say, that this movie does occasionally threaten to touch on. I'm not saying it's like a fully formed thought, but it's a potentially interesting avenue.
Neill Blomkamp hasn't had a fully formed thought in his life.
Well, Neill Blomkamp has had one fully formed thought in his life, and it's that I really like aliens, and Alien 3 made me sad, so let me make a fifth one that ignores it. And then everyone said no. But, so, like, because there is one element of this movie, and it's a spicy element, so I understand why a lot of movies either don't touch on this or touch on this badly, which is that, so you have the, you know, human prawn racism, you have that, like, you know, interspecies bigotry, and yet, like, there are a couple of, you know, small moments in the movie that still like gesture at, like, you know, the real world racism that we have. And again, that's a really potentially interesting dynamic that you could play with in your sci-fi film, you know, comparing and contrasting and setting up one metaphor to, like, comment stronger on the real world or how people interact. And I think the movie, in maybe one or two scenes, like, almost gets there, but overall it doesn't amount to much. And I think that, again, like, this is Neill Blomkamp we're talking about, who, famous director of Chappie, probably can't trust him with that much subtlety. So yeah, just make the Nigerian gangsters like multi-ethnic cultists and we'll probably be peachy keen.
Honest to God, that is a fairly easy answer to this. But yeah, I mean, again, I think the problem still goes even beyond that, and that basically everything else in this movie as well is a lot of like gestures at thing and then kind of throws it away. And we talked about this even in Chappie. Like, again, this is a very Neill Blomkamp issue in that he loves the Snyder approach of, this is a great idea, this is a great shot, this is a great concept. Okay, tell us about it. What does it mean? I like the way it looks.
I haven't been able to shake the Zack Snyder comparison since he made it in the Chappie episode, because it becomes more and more true by the day that, like, these are people with big ideas and clearly like a at least some level of visual like composition talent, right? Like, there's always some striking imagery, no matter how bad the movie is as like a whole.
There are stuff from fucking Man of Steel that I will never forget. Like, it is ingrained in my brain, even if it's bad.
Yeah. Like, and most of the stuff that is bad, hey, wouldn't you know, it was in the trailer. Yeah, and no, I mean, that's definitely still true here. Like I had said at the beginning, pretty much every problem that we talked about in Chappie is here in some way or another. Maybe not to the same degree, maybe not as bad, but the seeds that will become Chappie have been planted in the public consciousness.
I mean, I would argue that, honest to God, some of the problems with Chappie are here just as bad. They're just being well hidden behind a decent idea in the micro. As I mentioned in the beginning, like, this movie works in the micro in various scenes, and like it's easy to hide some of the stuff going on outside of it by being like, oh no, that scene was actually pretty good, and just not thinking about it in the context of the rest of the movie. Like, just some small things. This, if you let me nitpick for a second here, like, this will hopefully elucidate some of what I'm talking about. Number one, I mentioned this already. Why did his friend try to hack into the system and prove that he's innocent? By all stretches of the imagination, it seems like they met 3 days ago. Why would this person do that for him? Why did his wife return to him? She didn't seem like she was interested, but all of a sudden that's back. And you know what? Maybe you can make the argument that, like, oh, there's a whole fame thing going on with it now. But that's never touched on. That's something that I am imparting to it right now as something someone might argue, but like is never explicit within the text. Again, what the fuck is up with the cat food? The cat food... I'm going to break down the cat food, because I tried to break this down for Jackson earlier and he sounded confused. And like, I think I came back around and did it in a nice way. So if you're confused as to why I'm so obsessed with the fucking cat food, let me try and explain it for you. The cat food is initially, as I mentioned previously, a symbol of oppression, of humans, basically pulling a jape over on the aliens. It's a poor word, but I don't know what else to call it. And be like, oh no, this is a delicacy. You want to eat it. This is what you want. And we move past it later, and then it comes to a point where the aliens are now obsessed with cat food. They want to eat cat food. They want to eat cat food all the fucking time. It's never entirely clear whether this is like a drug thing or if it's like actually good for them or nutrient rich or whatever. Jackson says that at one point somebody makes a remark about how it is a drug to them. It is unclear, in my opinion, that whether it is a actual drug to them or if it's just some casual racism thrown out by one of these characters, because it's in the middle of the documentary series, which is basically just rife with false information and racism. So already you have two kind of clashing ideologies there. Like, what does the cat food represent? And we never see a payoff from it in any meaningful way. So like we never find out whether it is a drug, and like if it's a drug, you should see like some effects from it, either the trippiness when fucking Vicus eats it and, you know, goes on a trip or whatever, or maybe we see some aliens in the slums, much like Snowpiercer, where there's the dude covered in boxes just doped out of his mind on chrono, or if it's food, maybe we should explore like why they like it so much. Is it, you know, match their nutrients or whatever? So like there's two clashing ideas there right off the bat. But Sean, I hear you say, as a smart viewer, that doesn't fucking matter. It's a throwaway point in the movie. And you know what? You're correct, except for the fact that it flies in the face of everything that we know about the aliens. Because if this was 3 days after they had landed and we were giving them cat food, I'd be like, no, that makes sense. We're still in the learning phase. They don't know what we know. We don't know what they know. We can't talk to each other. The language barrier has not been broached yet. It's all chaos right now. The problem is that this movie takes place 20 years past that point, and so the fact that they are still eating cat food and indeed still getting duped into exorbitant costs for cat food raises a lot of questions about a number of things, namely the fact that these prawns are clearly at least at human intelligence levels, theoretically beyond that given what we've seen them do. Why are they still being duped for this? Why are they still giving just billions of dollars worth of of tech to Nigerian scammers, which is a whole another level there, and getting 100 cans of cat food in return? Like what is the logic in this movie? What is the internal idea there, other than to put the mech suit there so that fucking Vicus can go Metal Gear Ray on people's asses, because clearly Neill Blomkamp likes Metal Gear.
I mean, you know what, Neill Blomkamp? I like Metal Gear too, so I appreciate you out there, fam.
But I mean, I hope that explains why I'm so hung up on a lot of like these weird little inconsistencies, because all of these little inconsistencies are very little inconsistencies until you start comparing them to other elements of the film, and suddenly they are not small inconsistencies, they are Grand Canyon level cracks in the film that I cannot get past.
Well, allow me to use the cat food because I think it is a good example to jump onto what is, maybe you don't feel this is the grand unifying, like one of the biggest problems, but I feel like a lot of these small inconsistencies do add up to one really big problem, and it's basically that. Well, I mean, strictly speaking, any Blom-ders that are made are a product of the big problem, Neill Blomkamp. But no, I think that's like one of the overriding problems with the movie structurally. And I think that maybe this character more than any other illustrates the difference between like something working in the micro or working in one way, but like being a disservice in the other way, is actually Christopher Johnson's character. Because on some levels, Christopher Johnson's character works really well, that like he is sympathetic in that more traditional sense. You do want to see him succeed. Like there is a dynamic with Vicus, partly because Vicus is like such an antagonist to him, arguably his biggest antagonist. If you look at it as, Christopher Johnson's story, I think that, however, the fact that Christopher Johnson is so human acting, like that works for getting him on your side. But I think what's maybe disappointing to me is that like in early on, the movie does a really good job of like making the prawns like seem truly alien and difficult to understand, and then kind of asking you to sympathize with them anyway. Like I think that's a pretty like salient, like powerful point. And I think that a lot of that stuff, like why were they all huddled in the ship for 3 months? Like even after all this study, people don't understand them.
That part drives me so fucking much. I'm so upset. The ship part is another thing that just drives me up a fucking wall. Like I'm not gonna get into the tear here, but like, why? And don't you fucking come for me and be like, oh, it's because the control module fell out. If the control module is your goddamn escape pod, you done fucked up designing your ship, and I will hear none of it.
But I think towards the beginning of the movie, yeah, a lot of those like ambiguities work pretty well, and like making the prawns sort of difficult to understand, like clearly intelligent, but not something we can understand just so easily. And like maybe it would have been as simple as like having to go through the movie as like removing Christopher Johnson's subtitles. Like I don't know to what degree you would have to rewrite the entire movie, but the bottom line is that it's so weird to have the prawns like acting genuinely alien, which is one thing that I think this movie has over a lot of other shitty like race allegories, is that like usually, you know, Bright will put orcs in, you know, sports jerseys and call it a day. But here they actually commit to like making the prawns feel sort of mysterious and like feel like they could theoretically be this alien race. And it helps avoid like some of the one-to-one like problems that arise when you do that, right? And it potentially could have been really cool, but then, well, we want all this stuff to happen that requires having like a human co-lead. So we're just going to make Christopher Johnson act like a human because why is he the only one that acts like a human? Nobody knows. And Neill Blomkamp doesn't care. So while, yeah, he is sympathetic, he is likable, you do want to see him succeed in the moment to moment, and that's not nothing. I mean, I did feel like tension in a lot of scenes where like he was getting mistreated. So it's effective in that way. But when you look at the big picture of the movie, the pieces don't really line up there. And I think that's a big problem.
And that's a better example of that than me getting upset about cat food.
But no, I mean, the reason that like I was thinking about is that like the cat food is part of that, right? Like it's like if they just like, yeah, we keep giving him cat food, we don't know what the fuck that's about. Like if the movie had committed harder to like, you know, the prawns as like aliens that are difficult to understand and then asking you to understand and sympathize with them anyway, that would be one thing. But as it stands, it's like, well, why is he Christopher Johnson going ape shit over cat food? Because then you'd have to explain why, because he acts like a human. So we got to ignore that. We got to move on.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is just another element of a bigger and broader issue with everything else going on with the movie. And there are a lot of them.
Yeah, no, I mean, I do agree that there are a lot of problems. I'm not about to sit here and say that District 9 is a masterpiece or even that it's like amazing. But I do think that it deserves some credit in the ways that it gets you involved in the narrative, like especially towards the beginning, and smartly handles some of the traps, not all of them, but quite a few of the common traps of these like fantasy sci-fi like race allegories, of which there are quite a few, and most of them are pretty bad.
I'll give it credit for some of the beginning. That's about where I'm willing to get. Outside of that, I'm not a fan of this movie. It is fine. It is fine. It is fine in the competency. Outside of that, it is not. Do we have anything else we want to say, or we want to wrap this up?
Nah, I think we both got our points across. Let's get this show on the road.
Well, I've been Sean McKinda. Follow me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. I've been getting weird on Twitter.
Yes, you have. I've been meaning to ask you about this.
I'll never tell. Tell us about yourself, Jackson.
I'm Jackson Keller. You can find me on Twitter at Jackson J. Keller. I mean, I decided to tweet, "I will never be a hog man" in Japanese, and that's, you know, I'll go to my grave and that'll be my greatest accomplishment.
If you want to follow the podcast, that's at BADH_cast on Twitter. We have a Patreon. It is paused right now. I don't know what that means for anyone who wants to go explore that. That's patreon.com/BADHcast. I'm not going to talk anything more about it because nobody's paying us right now. But it's there if you want to go look at it and figure out how it all works together like that. Fuck, man, for all I know, it's free while it's paused, and I don't really care at that point. If you want to go try and exploit that, go try and exploit it. Who knows? But thanks to Lords of High with our theme song. It is Suicide, alternate take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band. You should go check them out however you can. They're available everywhere you can stream it. You should go support them, buy their music, stream them on Bandcamp. I think you buy their music on Bandcamp, stream them on Spotify, whatever. Fucking support them. Also, links to 25 years later, say.com. There's a button up in the corner that you should go click on, but you should also read everything else going on that website. There's a bunch of really talented people doing a bunch of really talented writing. Next week, I guess we're doing Cats.
We really do be doing Cats. I mean, it's about time. You know, we're both filling in important cultural touchstones. You watch this week, I'm gonna watch Cats the next, because I suspect Cats will continue to be a fucking important cultural touchstone in the years to come.
Memories. Turn your face to the moonlight. And don't trust it. Bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go